Stop Killing Games has passed, both in the EU Citizens' Initiative and in the UK parliamentary petition. What does this mean for indie developers, and what will all of this actually entail? First of all, I'm going to go over what's in the Citizens' Initiative and the petition. To kind of explain it simply, it's once a game reaches end of life, you can't just kill it. You have to provide some way for the users to continue to play the game. And that basically means you've got to change the nature of the game so it doesn't rely on servers if it's a kind of always online game. So you just spoof that basically. And if it's a multiplayer game, you have to provide some way for the users to set up their own servers at the end. This doesn't mean the company actually has to continue to support the game. They just do one thing at end of life. For 99 or so percent of indie developers, we don't need to be concerned at all. Almost all of us make some form of single player game. These are not at all affected. The online only elements that some AAA games use just are not a thing we do. The closest most of us have is like some Steam or Epic integration and can be spoofed fairly easily by the player using already existing software. For the small number of multiplayer indie games, a lot of you obviously use peer-to-peer, use the Steam Datagram Relay, that's not going to be affected. Everyone who does use dedicated servers, this probably isn't going to be that hard to comply to, because ultimately you probably use something like a meal servers or something, and you can easily release the binaries for those, and they will just work. You haven't set up some intricate server infrastructure. Though I would very much kind of get the concern that, hey, I'm a small indie, I've made a game, I've released it, maybe I didn't get that much traction. So I just decided to turn the server off after the year because there's basically no one playing on it. Then what happens if someone does want to play and you forget to release the binaries? This could be a really kind of ham-fisted law where you get a million euro fine for not complying. So that's obviously a problem. Yes, I will go into the problems with this initiative as well, because while it's generally a good thing that we should be in support of, it's not worded super specifically, and there really should be exceptions. I think the first exception is for games which never really got off the ground. There should probably be them saying, hey, this really isn't for the game that had 20 people max playing it, and it was never had a substantial population, and the developer just went, hey, this isn't worth supporting, especially not for a long time, it's costing me money. And for whatever reason, they just forget to release something. I don't know if that really should be kind of enforced. Another obviously exception is free to play, but I do believe that is already written into the initiative. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything because the initiative and the petition are in the end just the requests. The EU and the UK don't actually have to follow them at all. They can make whatever law they want. They can completely ignore them, which sadly I think is probably the most likely outcome. We've really, everybody's really tried to kind of marshal everybody to sign these petitions, and we've gotten to the minimum signatories in both. Keep signing the EU one definitely because we need some kind of safe area because some of the signatures will just be fake. Some of them are going to be signed by people outside the EU. Some of them might be bots. Some of them are going to have misfilled information. So definitely get that up to kind of 1.4 million. I would say is what they put as a safe mark, but definitely something like 1.2 million. Of course, if the EU and UK do end up actually implementing some law regarding this, don't necessarily expect it to be perfect. They generally don't always know what they're doing. They're not experts in video games. Again, they're probably not going to implement anything. That's not a reason not to sign a petition. I also want to cover some of the things that have been said against it, notably pirate software. He gave some reasons. I believe the most notable reason was that people would act maliciously to get a game shut down. So what you'd have is basically a game, and it has some servers. And his idea was that some people would come along, and they DDoS the game. But the developers found it not worth supporting the game anymore; it just cost them too much because of all the DDoSing. At which point they'd be forced to release the server binaries, which according to pirate software, would then be used to generate income via private servers, which is just wrong in so many ways. First of all, the people who run these kind of servers, these small game servers, which maybe make some microtransactions, they tend to be pretty young people. They tend to be teenagers, young adults, that type of thing. And to DDoS a game into kind of submission is probably going to take a few years. So you're telling me someone who is a teenager, who has very poor long-term planning skills generally, is probably not thinking 3 years ahead, and if they are, probably thinking exams and university instead of DDoSing a game. You're telling me that guy is going to spend thousands of dollars, pounds, euros, whatever, on renting botnets to DDoS a game, and then at the end of that, after they spend all that money, they're going to set up these servers and they're going to make a tiny amount of profit, when they could have just done this on already existing, more popular games, and not to mention, obviously, they've done completely illegal stuff. And also, they've killed the game's player base because the developers are kind of stopping supporting this game because the player base is dead because they killed it, and now somehow they expect to make money out of that. That's really weird. Also, he thought it was that they had to release the actual source code, which they don't, because if you release the source code of a server, you're generally releasing most of the source code of the game. I'm still a bit concerned. Maybe some developers have, hey, our server binaries are the anti-cheats in them we still use. So for them, they might have to do more work to remove those anti-cheats. Again, the actual suggestion is it has to be a playable state, and I'll go into the implications of that more in a little bit. But definitely, these bad people who are going to be exploiting DDoSing these servers to make their pay-to-win versions later. If the standard game doesn't support pay-to-win features and isn't moddable like Minecraft or something like that, they're just not going to be able to implement those because it's the server binary and they can't edit that, not easily at least. So they're just going to be spending money on server hosting. Now, I just said about the game being in a playable state. Now, I think most people have this idea that this will mean that the game is going to be just like the old days, just like the prime bit of its life 5 years ago when they're having fun with their friends. But no, that's not going to be the case. Sadly, this is kind of probably the biggest problem with the bill, is that most gamers are not going to benefit from this. They're going to be thinking it's going to be like the good old days. It's not. There's a reason the game shut down. It's at 1% its player base. So this really only benefits maybe, a small portion of people, but it is really good as a consumer rights movement, so we should definitely support this. Another problem is the exact wording. Even if that's not going to be the eventual law will probably be similar, which is in a playable state. What does that mean? Who gets to interpret that? Does the developer get to say, well, yes, this was mainly a multiplayer game, but you get to play the tutorial, which is offline. So technically, it's playable. Technically, 10% of the game is playable. Kind of what's like the percentage, basically. I don't think we can be kind of really strict, because if there's developer kind of maintained events or whatever in the game, obviously those are going to go. Maybe 90% of the content is playable, but where's the cutoff point? Where do we say, that's fine, that's good, just let us play the game? And where do we say, hey, that's not enough, we really wanted the core features? And that can be different for everybody. And that's a really difficult thing to, decide on. So I think, yeah, that is kind of a problem in some ways. And I don't think the law is going to properly look at that. And to some degree, we're going to have to do the old, hey, you left your old games in a bad state, we're not going to buy your new ones, which is just a general consumer boycott of bad developers, which admittedly would probably be kind of a better way to kind of do this type of thing. I know this law has, the proposal of a law has more implications, like if a developer goes into business or whatnot. But generally, I think gamers need to get a lot better at going, hey, you're a bad developer, I'm not going to play your game, instead of just going, well, yeah, you were about to develop the last 10 times, you scammed me the last 10 times, but the 11th time, the graphics look really cool. So I'm going to assume you're not scamming me, despite the fact, ultimately it is going to be a scam or it's going to be disappointing. And we need to instead go, hey, you messed up the last 5 times. I'm not buying your game. Unless the reviews on Steam say, wow, you did really good. Um, I'm not buying your game at all. And talking of Steam, I don't know if this is going to benefit console players. I don't know how it's going to work for you. It's going to be way more difficult. Still possible, but you know, it's more up in the air. PC gamers, sure, we're going to get on servers. We're kind of used to doing this ourselves. Console players, it's going to be way more difficult, especially for console exclusive games. So these are my thoughts on the Stop Killing Games Citizens Initiative and petition. Overall, it's a good thing. Everybody should be in support of it, every gamer. It's not a problem for indie devs. We shouldn't be worried about it. And I think pretty much a lot of the criticism has been kind of pointless. It has been from people like Pirate Software, who clearly didn't know what the bill was about and were clearly biased into, not supporting it. I think I've offered some, fair criticisms, still support it, but I think it's not perfect, and we really need to get the exact wording and the law needs to be perfect for this to be used optimally. And even then, don't expect kind of utopia, everything's perfect. We're still putting a game on life support here, just instead of killing it, so it's not perfect. So thank you, like and subscribe if you found this interesting.